Hello, everybody. Once again, this is Paul Mancini from ASMGI. We're going to get started right now with our webinar. Today's webinar, The Evolution of Cyber Warfare, is a very exciting and a very timely topic. And I'd like to introduce our speakers. Today, we have Steve Racing, President and CEO of ASMGI, and Tamara Baker, who is a Principal Systems Engineer of the Americas for Forescout. I'm going to kick this right over to Steve and let him get started so that we can cover all the necessary information today. Thanks a lot for joining us, and Steve, take it away.
Great, thank you, Paul, and thanks to all of you for attending today and sharing your time with us today. As Paul mentioned, I am Steve Racing, CEO of ASMGI, and I'm really excited and happy to be joined today by Tamara Baker from Forescout Technology. So before I turn it over to Tamara, I want to just kind of go through a couple things. First of all, just a real quick introduction to ASMGI. For those of you who don't know us, we're headquartered in Cleveland, Ohio. We're a global full stack technology solutions provider, and basically what we mean by full stack is the full gamut of solutions in IT and governance, risk and compliance and security services, software development, and certainly as it relates to Forescout, a portfolio of strategic technology partners, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. But really excited about today's topic and today's webinar for a couple of reasons, but three specific reasons. One, Forescout's a great partner, and maybe some of you have spoken to them in the past, but for those of you who haven't, just a tremendous amount of expertise across all verticals, and just really cut to the chase and talk about value drivers and various different things. And you're gonna get a lot of that today on the webinar. So excited about that. And number two, the content that we're presenting today is just incredibly relevant and timely. And part of the reason for that is just the threat landscape that we experience today. The bad actors, the bad guys are very sophisticated and using very sophisticated tools. So, what we're seeing is the good guys are focused on identifying devices and vulnerabilities on our network so that we can protect ourselves, and the bad guys are looking for devices and vulnerabilities on our network so they can exploit them. So in any event, Tamara's going to drill into that in a lot of detail. So very excited about that. And third, is just the synergies in thinking and approach between ASMGI and Forescout. It's a real easy story to tell, and I wanted to kind of go into a couple of reasons why that is. And first and foremost, from a synergistic standpoint, holistic security, it's really solving business problems, right? But I think there are three critical elements to really building and executing on a holistic security program or model. And one is identifying risks in terms of business can understand. We'll talk a little bit about that real quick. And leveraging frameworks to evaluate yourself and basically prioritize how you're going to approach these risks and how you're going to mitigate those. And number three is really architecting an ecosystem, critically important, but orchestration and automation, and putting yourself in a position to really leverage the benefits of those things. So item number one, when I think about, articulating cyber risk in terms of business can understand, I go right to quantifying risk, and we have a very structured model around quantifying risk that's, based on a risk engine and a quantification methodology and those kind of things. But what it's a topic really unto itself. We've done webinars in this. We'll do some more, and if you're interested, please reach out. But there's cyber is pretty complex, as we all know, but I did want to point out that our quantification model is based on the CIS framework, and it's very relevant because so are a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today, right? So item number two in a holistic model is basically leveraging a framework to baseline yourself against and benchmark yourself against, and also to help you prioritize your risk. So if you look at the CIS controls, it's a great framework for that because it's dynamic. It's not a static framework, right? There are experts all over the world, and they're evaluating the current landscape and prioritizing the risks. So I wanted to really drill into control number one as it relates to today's topic, because first of all, it is the highest priority. And honestly, it doesn't really matter what framework you leverage. You're going to see asset inventory, particularly around hardware and devices connecting to your network as it relates to this. But control number one is really getting in the weeds on and making sure that you're identifying the assets that are connected to your network, but also being able to segment them into authorized versus unauthorized access and take action, whether it's quarantining or segmenting your network or those kind of things. And so the other thing I really want to highlight on this slide is CIS does a really good job of recommending, like, these are the things that you ought to be doing in your network, and they break their controls into, basic and foundational and various different things. But the basic controls are just that. You should be doing those things. And then from an implementation standpoint, they create these categories of that they call implementation groups, and it's really based on the maturity of your security posture. Regardless, if you look in the kind of the body of this slide, in the subcontrols under control number 1, regardless of what your maturity level is, they're still recommending as a highest priority that this control gets implemented and that you can identify all the assets on your network, and then you can also basically block any unauthorized access to your network. So very, very interesting from that perspective, and we'll elaborate on that some more. Lastly, and item number 3 in the holistic security model is architecting an ecosystem, and that involves orchestration and automation. And I think this is a critical element in being able to leverage the efficiencies that come with orchestrating and automating. I mean, there's just so much data available when it comes to identifying vulnerabilities and even devices on your network, and the amount of data is just increasing at an incredible pace, right? So we've had a saying at ASMGI for quite some time that action equals results. And honestly, this saying will always be true. I think it's universal, right? But the net of it is that you don't get a result without taking some action. So eliminate analysis or paralysis by analysis, right? Take some action, get started, and that's where results come from. But we have upgraded. We've upgraded to saying 2.0, and really now it's orchestrated action equals great results. And just based on the modern technology and the landscape that's out there, when you position yourself to be able to leverage orchestration and automation across multiple tool sets and basically create a baseline that enables data sharing and all these various different things, you position yourself for great results, and that's really where they come from. And with that, I want to get Tamara on so he can just get into the meat of the topic today and really elaborate on how Forescout really addresses these problems. So with that, I will turn it over to Tamara, and Tamara, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. As I was introduced, my name is Tamara Baker. I've been with Forescout for quite some time. Just a little bit of background about me. I don't really have to dive too deeply into this for you guys, but I have been with Forescout for a number of years, and prior to that, I was actually a customer of Forescout where I developed and deployed a lot of the topics we're going to talk to so in the real world. And as Steve mentioned, we cover all sorts of verticals, whether you're healthcare or financial, education, public sector. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from. This is relevant across the board for you. I just want to start with a little bit of background in the sense that, what are the challenges? Why are we seeing such an uptick in these attacks right now? And really, it's because there's a lot of motivation for these bad actors, right? So our attack surface is just expanding uncontrollably. It's no longer just your campus environment, right? It's your cloud, it's all the mobile devices, and users with insider threats, whether it's an insider threat that's somebody that's being nefarious, or just an uneducated user that's doing the wrong thing there. And then IoT, that's another huge one. Folks don't have a real strong handle on all the different non-traditional devices connecting to their network. And then these attacks are well funded, right? So these aren't just script kiddies anymore in their basements having fun. This is organized crime. We've got, nation states are attacking all the time, right? So that's always there. But the organized crime, the hacktivists, are the ones that are really triggering all these big breaches that you're hearing all over the news. And it's, again, it's very sophisticated, as Steve alluded to. So now there's several different ways they're coming in. 0 days are used, but those are very, very, rare compared to the known vulnerabilities we're going to talk to. But the economy is where it's all at, right? So when I look at a specific example, we had a ransomware attack in the Southeast, a major NFL city. I'm not going to call them out. Everybody probably already knows about it. SamSam hit them pretty big. And SamSam, they asked for a $50,000 ransom only. And, of course, they're not going to pay the ransom. They're now in the hole well over $10 million trying to recover from this. They've recovered mostly from the attack at this point, but it cost them over $10 million to get recovered for it. And when you think about that $50,000 ransom, the folks that are behind SamSam, the last report I saw is they've already made over $6 million in ransom. So I don't have a calculator in front of me, but if you take that number and divide it by 50,000, that's a lot of successful attacks that they've hit. So it's very lucrative for them and very easy to get to what they're, the money that they're looking for. And when we look at some of these big attacks that we've all heard of, there's even more relevant ones that have happened more recently, but we've all been hit by something. Like, we've all been hit by Equifax. I know I've been hit by OPM and Home Depot and Target, right? My name is just out there. I know all the details about me is already out there, and I'm sure many of you are on the line nodding your head in agreement. We've all been hit in one way, shape, or form by one of these major attacks, one of these breaches that we've all heard over the news. And, what's really causing these attacks? And the top 10 vulnerabilities are older than 1 year, right? So these aren't 0 days. These are attacks. These are vulnerabilities that should have been patched 12 months ago, right? So that's a big problem. How are these breaches still happening on vulnerabilities that are that old? And we're going to get into that in a little bit. But that's where we find that the attacks that are coming in are not 0 days that everybody clamors about. So what are the trends that are making your breach inevitable? It starts off with the growth of diversity. So, if we look back in the left side of this, it was all traditional devices that are connected to your network. It's very easy to manage. You can install agents on them. You had more control. But then that number of devices exploded, right? So we're looking at 30 billion devices by next year. And out of those 30 billion devices, the great majority of them are no longer traditional devices that you can manage by normal means. You can't put agents on these things. So these are, your cameras and your PDUs and your badge readers and your TVs in all your conference rooms. All these types of devices that are connecting to your network are just not manageable. You can't get a handle on the visibility and security of these products. Oftentimes, these products aren't built with security in mind, so they're very flawed and very exploitable. Next trend that we see is a huge adoption in the cloud. Everybody loves the cloud. Cloud's great, right? Saves a lot of resources. You don't have a data center on-prem for these services, and that's all fine and dandy. But the issue with that, again, is it becomes a sprawl. You have all these servers in the cloud now, and you may or may not have a handle on, first, the visibility of them all, and then secondly to that, where are all the various vulnerabilities in each one of these. And it could be vulnerabilities as simple as a security setting that was missed or whatever it may be. But that huge cloud adoption is making you far more vulnerable. It's expanding your attack surface greatly there. The third adoption is the IT and OT convergence. So we look at ICS SCADA, we look at manufacturing plants, distribution centers, retail has big POS systems and banking, and it doesn't matter what field you're in, even the medical IoT devices. I mean, all of these non-traditional devices are converging now. They used to be air-gapped. They're no longer air-gapped. Some folks still think they are air-gapped and then find that there's somebody coming in through the outside and interconnecting in. So what we find is a convergence where the folks in charge of those OT environments typically don't know much about security, and they never had to, right? They just needed to make things work so that business was producing and the company was making its money. And the folks in charge of the IT world really didn't know anything about what an OT device is. They couldn't tell you anything about that robot or that conveyor belt or whatever it may be. And now one of two things is happening in this convergence. You've got the OT guy that knows nothing about security is being tasked with security, saying, look, you must secure this. Or you've got an IT person saying, hey, you are now going to take the security of the OT environment as well, and they have no idea how to secure that OT environment because they don't know anything about it. That convergence provides a huge risk that the ForScout will talk about how we mitigate that risk for you as well. So as we look at this, right, and you're seeing this trend happening with this increasing number of devices and diversity are coming online, but your ability to actually see and control these devices is decreasing exponentially as well. And that creates this chasm. And what happens there is where the WannaCry, the Petya's, the SamSam, Eternal Blues, all these different things are happening because your attack surface is getting so big and you just can't see it all, right? You can't get your hands around it. And that's where it leads to the consequences of this, this huge growth, right? So by 2023, we're looking at triple the number of endpoints on your network than you think you have today. So it's a very, very big expansion. That's just the way the world is working right now. The consequences, of course, is 80% of these attacks are well known. These are not 0 days. These are known vulnerabilities that have been around, and they'll continue to be known for up to a year, right? So again, the top 10 we mentioned earlier were all older than a year old. When we look at something like Equifax breach, that was literally one server that didn't get patched, and the attackers are persistent enough to find that one server. So unless you gain that complete visibility that Steve was talking about earlier, and you actually have a handle on everything on your network, all it takes is that one server to lose tens of millions of dollars for you. When we look at the threat landscape here, there's a huge landscape that we're all aware of now. The campus is the old days, right? But now we're looking at the data center. We've got the cloud. We've got the Internet of Things. So Internet of Things includes the OT environment, includes medical IoT, includes everything. So this landscape is huge. Your enterprise is far bigger than it ever used to be. And then the different attack vectors are coming in through the network side. As you can see, the network side has attack vectors across every part of your landscape there. And then you've got devices, right? So there's threats coming in into each of the devices, whether they're Trojan horses, whether it's an advanced persistent threat or malware, whatever it may be in the various landscapes here. And then applications are being attacked left and right. So these are zero-day exploits, not as common, but they do still exist and happen. Again, denial of services, botnets, we all know about Mirai. These are also coming into the users, and this is, again, where the users are either being targeted and taken advantage of, either, unbeknownst to them, maybe the software you're using to manage those user applications aren't working, whatever it may be, but there's a ton of threats there. And then, of course, last but not least is your data is under attack. So your landscape is huge. If you're a security person, if you're a CIO, CISO, if you are, a security architect or an analyst, or if you're a network guy or a patching guy, it doesn't matter who you are, you've got this big landscape that you're trying to defend against, and this is monstrous, right? This is very difficult for us to go through. So what do? As an organization, we buy tools, right? and the market is exploding with tools, right? So there's different types of tools, whether it's EDR, NAC, privileged access, whatever it may be. There's net solutions that are coming into the market. They're establishing themselves. We've got new solutions like, the UBA market, deception market, CAFE. All these different tools are just coming on the network, and you're being overloaded with these different options for all these different products. And what I find is each organization I go to, they have upwards of 50, 70, even some organizations have, I think some of the bigger ones had 130 different tools and all these different vendors from legacy on up that are trying to stay relevant, as well as new types of technology. So you get this tool overload, and as Steve mentioned before, you're getting all sorts of reports, and you're getting analysis and data and this and that from all these places, but the human element is still tying all these things together, and that human element is what's still allowing the breaches to happen, because we can't correlate, we can't automate as a human quick enough, well enough to make all these tools work well together. So what does this mean for you and your team? So if you're somebody in charge, this is probably what your team looks like on a daily basis. If you are hands-on keyboard on a daily basis, this is probably your thought and what you want to do every single day of your work life. I know I can't see your faces, but many of you are probably nodding in agreement. Yeah, I probably want to do this. These are all the things I'm looking at. And the big thing in the corner there is nothing correlates between all these different tools that you're leveraging. So we all wish we could do that and set our laptops on fire and just be done with it, but obviously that's not where we are. We have a job to do. And one of the things that everybody has heard for a long time is the defense in depth, right? That I'm going to get into the flaws of what that actually entails, but as you can see across the screen, we've got all sorts of devices or tool types across that you're trying to build your defense in depth. And we think we got it covered because we've got all these tools doing all their different jobs. But inadequate mitigation leads to security breaches. So when we look at configuration, vulnerability, risk assessment, right, you think you're done, you've got these tools doing all that for you, you think you're compliant, but what we find today is the discovery itself is actually incomplete. You're using agent-based tools, they're blind to unmanaged devices. You're using these scheduled scanning tools. You may be leveraging a tool that can do scans and it's agent-based, where it's a combination. But what we find is you get incomplete and inadequate discovery. You've got gaps because these tools have inherent flaws. Agents go bump in the night. I don't know what it is, but everywhere ForeScout deploys, we find anywhere from 10 to 30% of a specific tool's agents are broken. Some tools are better than others. That's why I go down as low as 10%, and some agents are really bad, where I find 30% is pretty average, that are either installed and not running or just not even installed at all. Some of those tools require an agent to be on every single subnet. That doesn't fly when you've got subnets that are air-gapped, or subnets that should be segregated, like your OT, your ICS, your SCADA, your phones, and your printers, and these other attack vectors that you can't put a managed agent in there. That inadequate and incomplete discovery leads to incomplete classification segmentation. This is where, you're at risk because, hey, maybe I've got an IP table and I can see all the different IP addresses, but that still isn't enough for you because you're not seeing what those devices are. Should they be on? Is it somebody spoofing it? Is it something that's acting badly because somebody took it over, whatever it may be? Are things segmented properly? You can't really do network segmentation unless you've got complete visibility, discovery, and classification first. So that also leads to no automation for remedial actions. Many of the tools lack the ability to automatically fix themselves, whether it's misconfigured or broken or missing altogether. So these are where these technologies we look at when you're trying to build this defense in depth, you start having gaps. What happens when you don't have that foundational baseline visibility? That's that number one, number two in the CIS controls that Steve talked about. 100% visibility means across your entire enterprise. That means every device connected, not just the manageable ones. You really have to have complete visibility across your IoT and your OT and your medical IoT and your manufacturing, all of these devices that are in your environment, including the cloud and including your data center. If you don't have that complete visibility and tying that visibility together, this is what happens. You've got an IT asset management tool. It could be a CMDB. It could be something else. You're going to have gaps. There's your holes. You got a patching solution with broken agents. You're going to have holes. You're going to have an EDR solution. Again, misconfigured or broken agents, more holes. You got a vulnerability assessment doing scheduled scans. We're too transient of an enterprise today. The scans are being missed on a lot of devices. Here's some more holes for you. And you've got a SIM that you're trying to do big data analytics on. You're trying to do correlating of all these different risks. And if it doesn't have the full visibility, there's some more holes for you. So there's a lot of pathways to that one machine. And in most scenarios, it's actually thousands of machines in an enterprise that you can get to, as an attacker. So how do we fix it? First and foremost, as Steve mentioned, you got to use some kind of security framework, whether it's CIS or the NIST controls or high trust, HIPAA, whatever it may be. That the theme across all of these frameworks is you have to know every device connected. That means everything. So that's the biggest key that I want to mention, not just your managed devices, but managed, unmanaged, IoT, every cloud, everything on the network. You have to have that visibility, asset management of hardware and software. You have to continuously discover, monitor, and assess this. It says specifically in most of these controls, continuously. This is not schedule-based, time-based, or anything of that nature. You have to see this in real time at all times and use your orchestration and automation in there. And then many of these controls also dictate you need to have something integrated together. I'll go back to the CIS ones that Steve brought up. As you can see, they're broken down: basic, foundational, and organizational. Where ForeScout comes into play is in the basic level, we cover a number of these controls out of the box, right? So providing a complete asset inventory of hardware and software and every version of software on every single device across your enterprise, the vulnerability management piece, your secure baseline configurations, whether you're using CIS benchmarks or the DoD SIGs or however you're trying to do security benchmarking. Most organizations just set group policy, or they would do an image and set and forget, and they just don't realize that the security baselines change dramatically over time if you're not continuously monitoring it. Under the foundational piece, there's many other controls, whether it's malware defenses, access control, and whatnot. You know, it would take me another 30 minutes to really dive deep into every one of the controls, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to highlight the ones that we do cover. And then, of course, organizationally, you know, you're going to have pen tests, you're going to have security awareness, you're going to have all these different things that ForeScout's going to help cover for you. And then I've even highlighted some of the ones that we help bring you a better return on your investment and some of your other tools that maybe ForeScout isn't doing your web browser protection or, you know, boundary defense, but we do have integrations into these different tools so that make sure that those are working properly and able to function the way that you paid to make those work. You need to have visibility and control across your entire extended enterprise. This is the ForeScout platform we're talking about. If you can leverage the same technology, people, and processes across the extended enterprise, now your disparate teams, all these different silos are broken down, and everybody has a single pane of glass across your campus, your IoT, data center, cloud, and operational technology to gain that complete visibility. And what does ForeScout do? It gives you visibility upon the network level. So no matter where a device is coming in at, ForeScout's going to see it coming in because we're talking to the network. We're talking to the network either at a campus, we're talking directly into AWS or Azure, we're talking in the vSphere for your data center. We're speaking at all those levels so that we don't have those blind spots. ForeScout actually has over a dozen methods of discovery and classification to ensure that devices are coming online or not being missed, so that you actually fill in those blind spots and those gaps, and we give you that complete 100% visibility for you. And as Steve mentioned before, automation is key. You've got these different jumble of devices coming online. You need to be able to notify, comply, and restrict based off of what those devices are. We put them in buckets and groups. So first we do the discovery and classification. We quarantine the bad stuff. We, ensure that the less privileged access gets connected to just what they need to talk to, and all this happens in an automated fashion. And then, of course, there's the orchestration with many of the other tools that you see on the left there. That's just a snapshot. There are even more tools that we could talk to and make sure that these tools that are working, we bridge these gaps so that these responses, this defense in depth actually becomes more automated for you. So, again, here's your nice little wheel of defense in depth of all these different tools. Once you start automating the process between them and you've got the ForeScout platform talking to every one of these tools, you bring this all together. It's the glue that makes it all together so that your defense in depth isn't siloed anymore. Your different tools are working together so that example I gave before is when your teams are all struggling with all their different aspects of their day-to-day jobs, they're all still siloed. And this brings it together, and so that when you have something that's not correlating, you've got one tool saying, hey, I've got this many machines vulnerable. You've got another tool saying, I've got this many machines vulnerable. You've got a third tool saying, well, this is the number of machines that I've patched, and nothing actually correlates. You've got three different numbers. How do you know what the source of truth is? And many of you that are in the audience right now, I'm sure you've experienced this, where you've got three different tools telling you three different things, and you don't know what to do because one person will say, no, this is what needs patching. And then the patching person will say, no, my tool says it's already been patched, or, I don't see those in my tools. So that's the big struggle with how you've got these gaps where an attacker can find that one machine or that 1,000 machines that are vulnerable, right? Because these tools are not correlating together. So ForeScout has, the ability to integrate with hundreds of different products. So as you've got all these different tools in your environment, we want to bring them together. We want to build that defense in depth, but instead of having it or just a siloed defense in depth, we want to close those gaps, bridge those boundaries there, and break down those silos so that you can start automating tasks, and your tools will work smarter together, and your teams will work better together as a team. So that once you've got that communication going and that automation between them all, now you've got higher walls built. So they're no longer segregated, defense in depth like an onion. Now you've got these big walls that are all working together to make everything happen for you. So what's the ForeScout vision? Vendor plus vendor is better, right? Maximize your investments. We understand that you've already spent, hundreds of thousands, millions in some big enterprises, whatever it may be, on this, that, or the other tool. But if they're not working together and they're not working properly due to the gaps that they may have in visibility or the agents or whatever it may be, we want to give you that foundational visibility and make those tools work better for you. And that leads to the consistent people, processes, and technologies. Once you've got consistency across your teams, you've got a single pane of glass, everybody working with these different tools and automating processes between them, now you've got the ability to ensure that these tools that are out there are actually doing their job, and all that threat landscape shrinks very to something that's more manageable for your teams there. Now, I went through this, I think, a little bit faster than I normally would have. So I'm going to go ahead and start fielding questions from Steve. Steve, I don't know if you're still back on the line here. We've got plenty of time here to talk a little bit of questions. I want to go a little bit more into some specific use cases for y'all too. So any questions that have come in, please go ahead and let's begin on that.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Tamara. That was wonderful. And I tell you, I just, I'm sitting here listening to you and the points that you make, and I'm like, what is the thing that gets me most excited about ForeScout? I mean, there's so many things that that you help enterprises address, but I just got to say, I really love, and this just ties in again to the holistic security model, but I really love the ability to help the tools, the point solutions that are already in place, just work, more harmony, right? Just work better together, and just really speak to the return on investment that people are going to get from the investments, A, that they've already made, or B, that they continue to make in other tool sets and those kind of things. So I think that's really cool, and we do have a bunch of questions from the audience, so I'm going to jump right into those. So here's the question. So how does ForeScout gain visibility to all devices without deploying an agent? I think you mentioned earlier that ForeScout is agentless. So how does that happen?
Yeah, so that's again, we have well over a dozen methods, and that's where we're tying directly into the network environments, tying into the cloud, tying into all these different enterprise environments, so that when we're speaking to the network, you know exactly what's on the network. We have, on top of the dozen discovery and classification methods, there's also another half dozen methods we use for posturing and interrogating devices, so that we can say, okay, this is an IoT device, this is a camera. ForeScout has the ability to actually log into that camera and make sure that the default credentials aren't being used, right? That was the Mirai botnet. Make sure that that blacklisted credentials aren't being used. Make sure that these things are actually your camera. Has somebody spoofed the camera and tried to gain access to your network because they made themselves look like a camera with changing their MAC address and IP address, for example? Having the ability to have over a dozen methods to discover and classify, and then half a dozen methods of interrogating devices and posturing them, gives us that ability to not have those blind spots and be able to see everything in that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Just to elaborate a little bit more on that, Tamara, how long does it take to really, so you're looking at network traffic, right? How long does it take generally to really flesh out what all is on the network?
It's machine time, so it's immediate. Again, when you employ all the dozen methods, it happens immediately. As soon as something connects to the network, ForeScout's immediately discovering, classifying, and interrogating to make sure it is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Okay. This one's a little bit related, but maybe it's different. Well, we can talk about what the intention is. Maybe there are a couple different ways, but how do we know if we've identified all of our assets or devices on the network? And when I read that question, I think about maybe there's two different ways you could interpret that, right? So if you're using ForeScout and you're doing discovery, how do you know that you've discovered everything? But what if you have an existing tool, right, that's doing discovery for you and you feel pretty comfortable that you've had anything? So maybe you can just, is there a way to, validate that information, I guess? Maybe you can just speak to each of those. Sure,
yeah. We hear that all the time. We go into environments and folks will be confident that they know what's on their network, and And usually I ask, well, what are you using? And they'll give me a tool or two that they're trying to use to discover and identify assets. And what I find is, as we expand on that is, well, how are you discovering, classifying your IoT devices? How are you doing it in your OT environment? How are you managing your cloud? And then I get more and more different answers. So from the same customer or prospect, right? So what we find is you may have 5 different tools that you're trying to complete discovery on all these different types of parts of your network in your enterprise, and none of them correlate, none of them line up together, none of them come together into one single source of truth. And then I would again, do your tools actually match? So if you've got something that's discovering things, does it actually line up with this other tool that you're using, or or your IP table counts? And they won't, because these tools have the different gaps that we talked about. So once we uncover the fact that you think you've got it covered, and then you realize, well, you know what? I don't have an agent on my phone network or my printer network or whatever it may be. I can't do that discovery on that. I'm not doing scans in these specific environments where scans will actually take out and shut down sensitive systems. So that's when we realize that, once we ask these questions and you start asking these questions to yourself, you realize that maybe you don't really have a handle on what, everything that's connected. Because if I ask you how many printers you have in your environment and your answer ends with a 0, you probably don't really know the true number. It could be 1,384, or it could be whatever it is. And once you've got Forescout deployed, you have an exact number for every type of asset. I can tell you specifically, I've got, 3,982 phones. I've got this many printers of this model of this printer and this many of this model. I've got this many cameras to the exact number, maintaining that for you real time. So that's when we realize that you think you may know or might have a handle on all the different IPs and all the different devices on your network, but unless you've truly done everything across managed, unmanaged, every subnet, every aspect of your enterprise, then you don't actually have that complete visibility.
Yeah, it's interesting where, the agentless versus agent thing, if you think about it, if you're using an agent-based tool, there's no doubt some devices that are sending traffic onto your network that you don't know about. Do you find, and this curiosity, I guess, but is there like an average number of devices that you end up for enterprises, you think, finding, Tamara, that, once you take a look with an, Forescout, is there an average percent, I'll say, more?
On average, what we find is when we go into an environment and somebody thinks they know what they have already, and they'll give us a number on day one, we'll say, okay, this is what you think your number is. What we typically find is 30% more than what they thought. That is the average. Wow. I have seen it as high as far more than that, multiples higher, in the sense that one of the biggest disparities I've seen was it was a global enterprise, and they thought they had 70,000 endpoints globally. And today, Forescout is deployed, and it's still looking at about 350,000. That was the biggest disparity that I've seen, 70 to 300.
I can imagine how that conversation went, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the average, though, is about 30%. Usually, an organization is off by a significant amount. When you think of 30% in your organization, that means your attack vectors are way bigger. Your threat landscape is far larger than you thought once you see that real number come through.
Yep. I actually saw a question just come in. I'm going to jump it right to the top because it's very related to this topic, Tamara. But do you have to buy Forescout to find out if if what you're doing is working, or do you guys have a method to, just kind of take a snapshot so people can validate what they're currently doing?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, because oftentimes when we do talk to organizations and they think they know, and then they realize that maybe they don't know, they want to know what the real number is so that they want to know how much Forescout to buy, right? So what we do is we have a couple of different options. One of them is called the Absolute Visibility Report. It's at no cost. We can come in to your organization, stand up an appliance, spend a few hours on it. By the time it's lunchtime, it should be configured and ready to go.
You
from
still
our
there?
side or your side? Oh, yes. Can you hear me?
Oh, yep, I can hear you now.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Lost you
Where
for a
did
second, so you may want to repeat.
Okay. So one of the options we have is called the Absolute Visibility Report. And in that Absolute Visibility Report, it gives you the what we'll do is Forescout will come out, we'll put at no cost to you, and what we'll do is we'll leave it there for a week. It takes a few hours to configure. We'll be there for just the one day. Nobody has to touch it for that week. We'll come back and we'll generate a report off for that 1 week and show you, here's where you are, here's the visibility report based off of what's on your network, what we actually found, where your compliance levels are, et cetera. So that comes at no cost. It's real simple, real easy for us to show you and demonstrate just where you are at, in your environment and how bad you may be compared to what you thought you were at.
Yep. Excellent. Yeah. And I will say that, that's a great, that the acronym's AVR. I mean, it's a great program, and it's a good opportunity to. I'm thinking about, okay, so I'm an enterprise. Wouldn't it be neat to know? Wouldn't it be neat to know if what we're doing is actually working, right? Or are there things on our network that so? And AVR is a very good program for that, and it's fast and it's a no cost option. So I think that's a great option. Thanks for elaborating on that. Actually, this is a cyber insurance related question. Do you have any examples that where deploying Forescout actually made a cyber insurance policy premium go down? Or
Yeah, that's another fun one. So we actually do have plenty of examples where when you deploy Forescout, and you've actually started doing this complete visibility and control and starting to get a handle on these CIS controls, as well as in this case, it wasn't CIS, it was a different mandate they were going by. There's a specific example here in the state of Tennessee. I actually live in Tennessee. And in this case, we had an organization drop their insurance premiums by somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000 a year because we were able to prove to them that the risk has dramatically reduced because of this deployment. So they got a significant return on the Forescout deployment, and not only a return but a surplus because of that insurance drop. And that is actually very common. And some of the other side effects that I've seen besides reducing premiums is, since you're getting this complete asset inventory, hardware and software, we found other organizations utilizing us to determine software usage analysis, and they've been able to drop their costs on software, and they've reduced their software licenses and counts because they've realized that they've been overpaying. The utilization of different software was way less than that they're paying for. They switched license to a floating license, et cetera. So there are a number of ways that you can just reduce insurance premiums and reduce your software costs. And I've had another organization tell me that they were being overcharged by their network infrastructure vendor. I'm not going to call it any names because they didn't have a handle of all their different network devices, and they were just paying their annual maintenance. And Forescout came in and itemized, here's all your devices, here's all the serial numbers, here's what's active, and compare that to what you're getting charged for, and they've lowered their costs there as well. So aside from the basic risk reduction, and the automation alone provides a reduced cost of manpower and labor to manually patch and everything. You get a huge return of that on that investment too. But the side effects of reducing your insurance costs and software costs as well is very impactful and very realistic for you.
Yeah, nice. And actually the quantified risk stuff is very near and dear to my heart, and that's exactly the purpose of quantifying risk. One of the things that we talk about a lot in our quantifying cyber risk programs is basically a dynamic insurance policy that that monitors pretty regularly your security posture and those kind of things. And I can tell you that we're in a position to work with enterprises, and again, we leverage the CIS controls, and one of the reasons is they map really nicely to all the other frameworks, and it's an international kind of a global volunteer network and all those kind of things, and it's dynamic by nature itself. But net is we can basically help enterprises see their total exposure and expected exposure against each control and in total, and basically how that changes when you start remediating certain things, leveraging Forescout, or solutions that map to the specific control itself. So it's, I think it's an area that's forthcoming, and just being able to really address the economics of cybersecurity is a huge area of focus for a lot of enterprises right now. So it's cool that you're actually experiencing that. That you're actually experiencing that right now. So let's see what else we have. Here's one that we didn't get to yet. Our organization gets nervous about automating remediation of endpoints and just automated control actions in general, right? So how do you deal with that? I mean, how granular is automation through the Forescout tool? Is it all or nothing, or do you have the ability to kind of crawl, walk, run, or how do you address that?
That's a good question. So most organizations we walk into are actually averse to automation for one reason or another. There's fear for some reason, and that's fine. So Forescout has a very granular policy engine that allows you to scope whatever actions that you want, however you want to do it. So the typical process would be, and I'll give actually a real world example. A new vulnerability just comes in today, and I don't want to automate the process to where Forescout's just going to patch every machine that joins the network for that. So what we do is you would set up a policy to say, hey, this is the vulnerability we're looking for. I'm going to use, Adobe Flash as an example. You need to be at this version of Adobe Flash in order to not be vulnerable anymore to the CVE. So you write the policy, and then you post date everything 30 days from now and say, hey, let my existing tools do what they're supposed to do. And then in 30 days, if a machine comes on the network and it still has that vulnerability, I can turn that action on automatically and let it get patched. And you can optionally quarantine or not quarantine. You can be granular and say, well, this subscope of people in my network are, not supposed to be at that latest version. For example, if I'm a network engineer and it breaks access to my firewall because the tool I use can't update to the latest version of Java or whatever, you can subscope and be granular with those settings and just turn on the actions when you're ready. What most organizations will do is they'll start off with discovery and audit. They'll see that, well, let me first audit my environment, see how vulnerable I am to these different, vulnerabilities, how many machines there really are that would fall into these. And maybe I'll start just turning on the action to fix them, but not quarantine, not block, not do anything like that. But let's go ahead and turn those actions on manually and say, hey, quick, I'm going to start fixing these, and we'll watch it run through and get everything patched for you automatically. And then once you're comfortable and you realize, all right, so the enterprise is mostly patched, then you can start turning on other controls to automate actions. Another specific example would be you've got some kind of advanced persistent threat tool out there that's looking for malware, looking for this, indicators of compromise. Today, how those tools work is if an indicator of compromise is detected, it's going to send an alert to somebody, and you have to wait for a human to get involved and analyze the alert. Is it real? Is it false positive? Whatever it may be. And if it's a real alert, typically this was like the target breach. They were 7 days late on this thing that had been alerting them for a week now. And by that point, the damage is already done. The data has been exfiltrated, or if it's ransomware has already spread like wildfire across the enterprise. Whereas the Forescout integration, the automation with these different tools would say, hey, an alert just came in. This machine matches 7 out of the 10 indicators of compromise. It's highly likely to be compromised, and then Forescout at machine speed will immediately quarantine that device, prevent that threat, prevent the spread of that, let's say ransomware, or prevent data from being exfiltrated, because you're able to take automated actions by setting those thresholds, right? If I've met 70% of the IOCs, then I want to make sure that I can take those automated actions there. So you have full control of when to turn on automated actions and what actions you want to turn on when you're ready.
Yep, awesome. So here's another question just as it relates to asset management in general. Is Forescout used for asset management projects, for example, like updating CMDBs or, the things that you would particularly or specifically see in an asset management program?
Yeah, so anytime somebody brings up an asset management discussion, or CMDB, whomever it may be, right? There's various vendors out there doing, CMDB and ITAM. My first question is always, well, are you using it today? Because I often find that those tools become shelfware because they're never fully in use. So the second question is if they say yes, we're using it, or maybe it's shelfware, the next follow up is usually, well, can you trust it? Is it a source of truth? Are you trusting the data coming into it? Do you trust that everything's populated in it? And that's typically where the answer is a no, and that's what makes it shelfware, or that's where you've got a security operations team using it, and you've got your compliance team using it, and you've got all these different teams trying to have a source of truth, and they can't trust the source of truth. And the third question would be, is your CMDB only for your IT asset management tool, whatever it may be? Or are you only using it for managed assets? And then that's almost always a yes. So well, what about your inventory and tracking and asset management of everything else, right? Because if you're following any controls or you're following any regulations or any mandates, that means everything. So all your IoT devices should be in there. All your OT devices should be in there. Everything that's connected should be in there. And where ForeScout comes into play is because we see all this rich contextual data of every single device connecting, we're able to populate and automatically update the CMDBs. You can check and say, hey, does this device exist today in your database? If not, add it to it. If it does exist, append to it, because not only are we going to put in, here's the IP, here's the host name, here's the MAC address, but here's exactly where it's connected to my network, whether it's the switch, IP, and port, VLAN, or the virtual switch, or the NSX security group tag that it's got, or the security group tagging in AWS, or whatever. No matter how they're joined to the network, wired, wireless, cloud, we're able to tag all those details as well as what's the compliance state? Is it baseline security configured? Does it have any critical vulnerabilities that are older than a month, 3 months, 6 months, whatever you set it for, et cetera? So all those data points are what you're going to really true up your CMDB for, and actually have it as a source of truth and keep it updated in a real-time automated fashion. So something that either doesn't exist today, we would give you that return on investment, or if it's shelfware, we can bring it back to life. Or if you're just struggling with a deployment because you're just having a hard time bringing all the assets into it, this is where ForeScout automates and fully populates that data for you.
Yep. Yeah, great answer. I just elaborate real quick. I mean, from an IT standpoint, historically, what we've seen from an IT asset management perspective is generally more of a financial view. It's about depreciation schedules and those kind of things, right? So a lot of times it's driven by finance or the accounting package. And asset, controlling IT assets has been part of IT service management frameworks for a long time, but enterprises have really been slow, I think, in general, to adopt those. But cyber, what we're seeing today is a big trend in the industry where, cyber has really heightened the awareness of the importance of IT asset management on both hardware and software. And so it's really bubbled to the top of the CIS control is a good example of that, right? It's the top priority.
Right.
But so cyber is driving a lot of that, but it still needs to tie back fundamentally to the historical, repository for IT assets, which in a lot of cases, like I said, is more accounting driven. But you can't have multiple versions of the truth, right? So you still have to map the two back, and I think
right.
it's so being able, discovery is a huge part, just because the accounting view of IT asset management is never accurate, right? So I've got actually multiple questions that are related to implementation. So I'm just going to summarize those and just kind of try to wrap everything into a kind of an overview. But can you, and this is one of the things that I always like to make sure that we do on these webinars, because it has to be on the minds of everybody. But so conceptually, all these things just resonate and make sense. They make really good sense. But how do you actually do it, right? And so maybe you can just talk through, Tamara, what an implementation of ForeScout looks like. How long does it take? What's your process? What do you think the maturity level of your implementation team is? Those kind of things, right? So maybe you can just summarize that and just elaborate on that a little bit.
A large part of an implementation is going to really depend on you, and in the sense that we've had implementations of 500,000 endpoints globally across the world, go from boxes in a closet to fully deployed, with comply to connect, access control, check. Complete soup to nuts, as the term goes.
You broke
right?
up a little bit,
And
Tamara. I don't.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes. Yep.
So those 500,000 endpoints that we're looking at for, a global deployment from zero to like full everything, matching all those controls in a matter of, I think we did it in 11 months, so just under a year. And that's because the team we were working with were working with us on all the planning, all the prep. We give them, hey, this is what we need, this is when we're going to need it, and there's a lot of, that teamwork involved, and as long as they're on top of their side of the house, we can do the deployment and implementation that way. The other aspect that I'll say is our most successful deployments and implementations, and actually the customers that are what I consider power users, are the ones where they are multiple teams using it and involved right from the beginning. So if you're just a security person, or you're just a network person, or you're just a software, patching person, whatever, and you're bringing ForeScout into the organization for your whatever it is that you want to solve for, you're going to be more successful because this tool helps and automates so many things across the board, across multiple organizations, that if you get everybody involved early and let everybody understand, here's why this is going to help you do your job better and get those multiple teams involved, that also is another way that implementations go quick and smooth and easy, because everybody understands the value and everybody gets something out of it, right? So everybody's going to have their own selfish needs, right? They're going to want to get something out of it. When they're putting work into something, they want to get something themselves. So when you involve the various teams and show everybody that they're all going to get value and have all the teams working together, that implementation goes much quicker and smoother as well.
Yep. And we're getting close to being out of time, and I definitely want to be respectful of everybody's time. But I did want to just kind of ask it a kind of an add-on question. And we think about crawl, walk, run a lot at ASMGI, and that's one of the ways, because adoption is challenging no matter what platform. Just everybody's got limited bandwidth and capacity, right? And they got 100 other things to do. So is there, like, if you had to think about, from the perspective of crawl, walk, run, I mean, are there some things that you would do first, second, third as it relates to a deployment? I mean, how would you approach starting from ground zero, plugging in, ForeScout, and then do this first, do this second?
Yep. So first and foremost, what we typically do is discovery and classification immediately. That's always the first step. You can't do anything else in regards to any controls or anything in your entire enterprise unless you know exactly what it is. So that's the first phase of it, is just discover and classify everything. Second phase is typically, let's fix some basics, right? So let's start auditing all my agents. Let's start making sure that we integrate with our vulnerability assessment tools. So these are like the second level, where as soon as the device connects, are the agents installed and running and working properly? If not, automate the process to fix that, or at least audit and understand where you stand before you turn on the automation. If integrating with a Tenable or Qualys or whoever you use for vulnerability assessment, say, as soon as the device connects, has it been scanned by your scheduled scan? If not, automatically trigger those. So you're starting to build that basic foundation of 1, 2, and 3 on those controls right off the bat. And then you start turning on more and more as you get more advanced and you're more comfortable with it. That's when you start utilizing it for some of those other examples that I talked about. So software utilization, automating of all the other patches, automating your other tools, and bringing that over. So that's kind of the phases that we'll work with. And eventually you start turning on controls at the end and start being able to block, and you'll feel comfortable blocking rogue devices or quarantining managed devices that are just not healthy.
Yep. Awesome. And we're at the top of the hour, and there's a couple more questions I want to reflect on real fast, and please, if you can stick around, we'll get through these quickly, I promise. But here's one that actually is addressed to me, so I'll answer it, and you can certainly chime in, Tamara, if you have any. But it says, Steve, how can my company get started? Should we reach out to ASMGI? What's this ASMGI's role in all this? That's a great question, and we're very comfortable as partners with ForeScout, and certainly we work with a lot of experts at ForeScout, and we always get those guys involved. But as it relates to some of the questions we've asked today and all those various different things, that we are going to release the the presentation from today, and there's contact information in there, but please reach out to ASMGI and we'll get engaged with the right people at Forescout and make sure that we can address your issues and concerns and those kind of things, and we can talk about even. I wanted to reflect on the implementation stuff. I mean, everybody's situation, even though there's a standard methodology for implementing, everybody's situation may be a little bit different, and they might be trying to solve a different problem, various different things. We want to work with you and talk through all those things and make sure that we frame things up in a way that's meaningful and those kind of things. So just any questions at all, or if there are any follow-up items, please, the contact information will be sent to you, and just go ahead and reach out to ASMGI, and we'll pull the right people from Forescout into the discussion, and we'll go from there. And anything, closing remarks or anything to add to that, Tamara?
Yeah, just to close, as a follow-up, we're happy to when you reach out, give you a full demonstration. What does this actually look like? We can put you in a test drive. You can get hands-on keyboard with the tool. We can do an absolute visibility report. There's so many options to just give you a better understanding of what real visibility actually looks like and what automation looks like. So reach out, and Steve will take care of you guys, and we'll be sure to provide the resources needed. And thank you for having me. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Tamara, for all your wisdom and expertise. And I will just highlight, you mentioned a test drive. If you're, whatever city you're in, we can schedule test drives in your hometown, and we can bring multiple parties together or do it dedicated, however it fits best. But very, very, very excited about the topic, and thank you again, Tamara, for your expertise in bringing that to the table today. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and that's all we have today. And hopefully we can follow up with you and talk to you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.